All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for a panel we're calling The Reality of Virtual Reality. We like the title. It sounds dramatic. My name is Dan Atkins. I'm a publishing producer here at Google, focused on Daydream, which for us is a combination of both our AR and VR efforts. But today we're going to be talking about VR. And VR, as you guys know, is still very much an emergent medium. Right? It's one where we're continuing to learn from every product that comes out. And more importantly, we're still in this phase where app developers can still learn a tremendous amount from game developers and vice versa. Right? So we're lucky enough today to be joined by two people who really kind of run the spectrum of VR entertainment in the industry right now. And have been pretty prolific in doing so, both having shipped multiple titles across multiple platforms. So Nick, Jonathan, thank you guys so much for being with us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm hoping that we can start just by hearing a little bit about who you guys are and what brought you to VR, and a little bit about the products you've been working on. So Nick, maybe we can start with you.
Sure. My name is Nick Vasconcellos. I am one of the founders of Turbo Button. We are a small indie studio in LA. We are 3 people strong. And just recently released this game along together on Google Daydream. And the game is, you play as a kid's imaginary friend, kind of going on these adventures, and you have the power to like move things in the environment and help this kid find their lost dog. So we've been going for a couple of years now. We started beginning of like 2015. Started by doing a couple of Gear VR games, and then this is our latest.
Awesome. And Jonathan, if you want to do the same.
Great. I'm Jonathan Flesher. I work at a company called Baobab Studios. It was founded by Maureen Fan, who used to run the Farmville franchises at Zynga, and Eric Darnell, who was the writer-director of the Madagascar films when he was at DreamWorks, and Larry Cutler, who was our CTO, who was the head of global character animation technology at DreamWorks. And so we've really come together as bringing kind of traditional cinematic animation and video game kind of talent to create something new for virtual reality. And you'll see on the screen, we have 3 pieces to date. The first one, Invasion, most recently won an Emmy Award. We're very flattered to have that happen, and it's been a top-performing app across all the platforms. Asteroids will be released this holiday season on Daydream, and Rainbow Crow will be coming out sometime next year.
Awesome, and I think we have a clip to watch on that one.
On Asteroids.
On Asteroids.
Yes.
Cool. I love that clip.
Thank you.
Very cool. So I'm wondering if we can start a little bit. I kind of want to take us through the life cycle of a product here. And so what I was wondering if we can start with is a little bit about the concept phase for you guys, and particularly ideation. How do you define a razor of what makes a good idea for VR versus a bad idea?
Sure. For us, so Turbo Button, we like only do VR games. Like that is our focus, is the gaming side. So a lot of times, there's kind of like 2 ways that we'll start ideas. One is with interaction, which is probably like the biggest way that we start things. It's like, does this thing just feel good in VR? You know, very often mechanics driven, and it doesn't even. I think because like everything is so early on, like you were saying, it's like it might not be the most like mind-blowing thing, but even just the smallest interaction design that can just feel really good feels like 10 times better because it's in VR, right? And like, so it's just really finding those core little moments that feel really nice, and then building around those, and then kind of like, sometimes we also come from the other direction. I'd be curious to know how you guys think about it, because it's like, it's just thematic, you know? It's like, oh, I want to be in this world, or just a little moment of whether it's like a character looking at you or something like that. It's just, that can be the hook moment that you build everything else around. So I don't. Yeah.
We come at it very much from a narrative storytelling perspective. That's kind of the benefit of having a guy like Eric Darnell is he's very prolific in terms of his ideas and has written a number of scripts that we then start with. These are the storylines, and he actually will pitch them to the audience, to the office as a whole. So we have these kind of brainstorming sessions, and then he runs through the story, and then we get feedback on the story, and kind of he takes that and adjusts it, and then we go into kind of interactive sessions as kind of thinking about, wouldn't it be cool if we could do this? And so there's already starting to be this emerging body of things that happen in VR that people have attached names to, like the dollhouse effect. Do I lean in and see little people, and can I peer into their houses? To, you know, I'm in water. I put my head above water, I put it below, I see under the water. You know, all those types of things are super cool to be watching created in this new medium, because it's just like, you know, when smartphones came out and Angry Birds did, you know, kind of the, I can actually get the feel of like a slingshot on a piece of glass. So this is that new thing here, and that's kind of how we go through that process.
Yeah, and I think like our razor for like what works or doesn't work often comes down to like comfort.
Comfort.
Yeah.
Very often comfort, at least. It's like any little thing that can feel weird can make you feel ill or dizzy or something in VR. It's like very easy to do, and I think we, especially in our earlier days of our company, like we would do a lot of experimentation around like camera motion. Like a couple of our games are like these third-person experiences, like Along Together, where camera's moving through the environment, and that can very easily make people feel uncomfortable. But we've like, to develop those systems to make them comfortable, we've like literally will be just like laying on a sofa for about an hour because we just tried something and it's like, oh God.
You need the guys without the depth perception at the office who don't get nauseous.
Exactly. We're not those guys. Actually, none of us.
And I'd say to follow up on that, in addition to the kind of comfort level, the things that we're really focused on is that interactivity that you're layering in doesn't really detract from the narrative. That's of critical importance to us as storytellers, is that the interactivity enhances the story as opposed to becomes the focus of kind of the experience.
So I mentioned like prototyping plays a significant role in this as well, right? You guys are trying different things in software as you're going and sort of figuring out what makes sense. What's the razor for you guys between sort of talking about an idea and being convinced that it's worth building?
You can start with that.
That's a really tough question, because right now VR is a brand new media. And if you come from kind of the film television perspective, that's a very, very well-known vocabulary. So if you go to film school anywhere in the world, they're going to talk about hard cuts, soft cuts, you know, pans, zooms, all these types of things. That is the language of storytelling in film and television. And once you get to VR, it's all thrown out the window. You're no longer on a set. You no longer have this window that you're looking through. You are now in the experience, and there's stuff that can happen all around. So a lot of that stuff is all new. So it's really hard to say there's a well-defined process for determining whether it works or it doesn't, because it's all brand new. And so that's part of the excitement, but also the challenge of working in this medium.
Totally.
It's like getting it in people's hands like as quickly as possible has really been our biggest thing, and it's hard. I mean, like, you are dealing with so many different problems and things you're trying to overcome during development, and you don't often have time to throw it at people. But like, the sooner you can get it in somebody's hands and like really find out what's working and what's not, like, you know, there are like, I mean, everybody always wants to develop their best practices for everything, but I think like we're not quite there yet for VR. There are certain things here and there that we like have learned ourselves or heard from other developers or whatever that we can try to avoid or specifically do because it makes things better. But like, I think like those rules are not hard and fast. They don't work in every situation. Something that actually feels good in one situation might feel terrible in another, and so like. It's really just about how other people react, and you know, it's the same. I mean, like, no matter what you're developing, whether it's VR or not, like, you are looking at this thing that you're creating for so many hours that it's hard to have any kind of perspective on it until you see somebody else react to it.
Yeah. And I would say there's a lot of stuff that when you come out of the film and television or the video game industry that actually is applicable. So we actually do storyboards even though those are obviously 2D versus not an immersive environment, there is kind of a pacing and a way to direct the scene, even though it's immersive. And I'd say the beauty of what game engines like Unity are doing right now, and they call it the real-time revolution, is the traditional animation process was animating in Maya and then going into RenderMan, and you'd have to wait forever for this stuff to be rendered out, and then you'd look at it and go, that's not right. And then you go back and you have to redo it.
Right.
Whereas our developers can sit just like is normal in the video game business, where you'd be like, why? It's not normal?
Yeah, exactly.
They put on their headset and they'd see
go.
it there. I need to put a cup on the table. Oh, I should have this character come in from here. And they can go and make those changes in real time and see it right away. And so that rapid prototyping is new for the animation industry, but I think very comfortable for the video game industry.
Yeah, I think like we spend a lot of time doing a lot of rapid prototyping and like game jams and like all that kind of stuff, just to like try ideas out really quickly and kind of throw them out. And actually like storyboarding is kind of like one of the things that we had a hard time with at first too, is like just figuring out how to like lay out the space. I remember our artists, like I was like, hey, we need like a storyboard for this moment. Here are kind of the beats, like, you know, figure out what you want this to look like. And he's drawing everything in these like tiny squares and shots and camera angles, and I'm like, no, like, like I basically had to go back in and like redraw the frames for him, but like very lightly. And I was like, you know what? Feel free to draw outside this. You know, think about how this whole space feels, and that really helped at the time. But now, actually, like seeing things like Google Blocks and like, you know, Unity is starting to do some of their real-time VR editing tools and stuff like that. Do you guys use any of that for like laying stuff out?
Yeah. We've used both Unreal and Unity, and we're currently building our current two pieces on Unity, and so we use their timeline feature heavily.
Yeah, I bet.
And there's a lot of really interesting things that they're disrupting, again, in the traditional animation industry, but it's quite comfortable for games.
It's crazy. I really want to get my hands more on like actually editing scenes in VR, because actually like one of the hardest things that is like starting a new level. And really understanding what the scale of that place feels like compared to yourself. We do a lot of like scaling up and down of the character to like do the toy box effect like you're talking about. So like we don't always, it's very hard to like imagine until you're actually in it, like what the scale of that thing will be.
Storyboarding, you know, there are companies out there developing tools, and people have tools internally to do storyboarding in VR. And that's kind of some of the rapid prototyping tools that are being developed and used out there right now.
Yep.
Really helps.
So we have these rapid prototyping tools that allow us to visualize things far more quickly and experiment far more quickly, which is clearly a benefit to animation and games. As you guys have been going through this rapid prototyping phase, and you're actually kind of moving from that prototyping phase into building your products, what are some of the biggest mistakes you've made trying to author content in this new medium, right? Obviously, there's the sending people to the couch to be sick for a while when things don't go super well, but what are some others?
I'd say for us, it's being heavy-handed with the users. It's pretty interesting because you have to kind of prepare for everything from an experienced VR user, which there are shockingly few out there right now, just given the penetration of the platforms, to complete newbies. And so you'll find people who will just jump in the experience and they'll just start staring off into the distance, or they won't even move their head.
Yeah.
You know,
Right. Yeah.
Move your head.
Yeah.
And they're like, whoa.
Yeah.
And you have to kind of plan for all those, but I think a core learning is that people, just like in every other media, they don't really like to be forced what to do. So you have to kind of entice them to do the things that you want so that they can experience the story as it was meant to be told in our case.
Yeah.
So heavy-handed things of like forcing them into a position or doing something or not allowing them to interact with something has been less well received versus others.
Audio is like a huge thing for that, right?
Yes. Audio, characters, you know, we often say one of the things you can do in VR is think like a magician. If you want the audience to look at you, you look at the audience. If you want them to look at something else, you look at that.
Right.
That happens, and if you have big expressive characters, that's fairly easy to achieve. And then obviously audio cues. it's a little challenging with the audio because not everything works that well in spatialized audio. Not everybody has, high-tech headsets, that
especially
can play
if you're
that.
on mobile or something, right?
Yeah. So you've got to be able to kind of span that gap, and I think just like in games, it often helps to kind of think of the lowest common denominator and build up from there.
Yeah, I think actually maybe you would probably hate me for this, but it's like one of the things that we have traditionally had problems with in the past is actually like our character interaction moments.
Yeah.
We've definitely we spent a lot of time prototyping interactions and gameplay mechanics, and we still very much value characters and narrative and all that kind of stuff. But we do come from a gaming background, and and so we definitely have had times in some of our products where we don't prototype our character interactions early enough.
Yeah.
And some of them end up working, and it's great. And but we've definitely had moments where we build out this whole character interaction. I'm in my head, I'm like, this is gonna be great. This is gonna be awesome. And then it totally flops, Yes. And now you're like, well, dang, I have to restructure my whole story. That was a pivotal moment.
Welcome to our world.
Yeah.
And the piece that we're just releasing this holiday is you actually follow the two aliens that were in the first piece, Invasion, who came down and invaded Earth and were repelled by a cute little bunny, Chloe. You follow them to their ship in outer space. And we found when we first put people out there, you play actually a helper robot on the ship. And we gave you robotic hands, and people just started running around the ship, jamming their hands into various places, thinking they were R2-D2 and they were going to take over control of the ship. There was going to be some Easter egg somewhere, and completely missing the narrative, or taking kind of the ball that you could play fetch with the dog and hitting things, trying to beat the characters. It's
right.
It's a very very interesting thing to run through.
Yeah, you give somebody a ball to play fetch with a dog, and then they go try to murder everything with the ball. One of the things that strikes me as you guys were talking about this is how some of the most profound moments in your products, at least for me, have been some of the most sort of simple in some ways, right? Invasion is always one of the first VR experiences I show somebody, and it's largely because you have that moment where Chloe, I guess the bunny, it just comes running right up to you and slides right into your body, and you really have this moment of eye contact, which is incredibly powerful, and it's the first medium I can think of where you have eye contact. And then similarly with Along Together, the first real interaction you have in the game is just waving to another character, and how endearing that is and how much it connects you to those characters. Have you guys noticed a theme of simplicity in these interactions that feels important? Are you noticing that users are growing into more complex interactions as they continue to progress through more VR content?
I think there's something about simple interactions though that immediately connect with people. It doesn't matter. I don't think anybody's sitting there going oh man, I'm bored of wave. Actually, it might get to that point now that I think about it. If we have too many moments of you wave to this character, it's okay. I've done this in VR before. That's fine. But I think so far it's been not so much about just trying to be oh, this is a simple interaction that'll be cool. It's just what sells that moment, and we're not really necessarily worrying about how complex it should be. I mean, especially for the very beginning of a sequence, right? Character looks at you, you wave at them, really pulling somebody into that experience. You have to do something that is minimally, or it's easy to understand and as impactful as possible. I feel like I'm talking in circles a little bit, but I think that is really key to, especially as we are getting mostly new users into VR. We don't really make games assuming that people have played VR before. We're still assuming this might be the first time somebody is ever picking this up. So how do we make it as easy to get into as possible?
Absolutely.
I don't think it's necessarily a simplistic thing. It's I mean, the kind of magic of Chloe coming up to you and bouncing around, it's amazing to watch people. You'll see people start hopping around on the floor, trying to jump back and forth, and they're like, oh my God, the AI behind that's amazing. She's reacting to me and playing with it. No, that's actually just a simple hop back and forth. There was eye tracking in there, which helped a lot, but the key piece being that it's more that it feels like real life. And to dig deeper on that, it is not that it's necessarily photorealistic because you are actually a bunny and that's a bunny and it's clearly not real life, but it's that it feels natural in terms of the way that you actually interact in your day-to-day life. And that's what you're striving for. And that could be a simplistic interaction. It could be complex. Obviously, we're going to probably stumble across the more simplistic ones because they're going to be easier for us to figure out right now. But as the medium grows and gets better over time, those will obviously become more complex. But it's that key of replicating the feel of life.
Yeah, and I think actually, like, thinking about the interactions by themselves, like, they might be very simple, but I think, like, they can be emotionally complex.
That's a great point.
Yeah, and that's what really feels good.
Yeah, that makes total sense. It's funny you mention it because I think the reaction I see from a lot of people, you can always tell when the bunny's about to hit because they go, like you have that moment.
Actually, that's kind of fun too. Is like intentionally doing things that are like slightly uncomfortable, like not in a physical way, but just in a way that makes you go, oh, like it really kind of wakes you up and like gets you going. Like that's really fun to play with.
Very cool. So you both have, at this point, shipped multiple products on Daydream, on Rift, on all sorts of platforms. What have you learned from those releases that you think you'll apply to your next products? Like, what are the biggest takeaways you've gotten from these experiences?
I'd say, I don't know if I have takeaways other than, like, right now it's a very challenging time as a developer because if I'm to say, in the West, forget China right now, but in the West, there's arguably 6 platforms to port to, and if you're talking about like a video game company that's on consoles or mobile devices, I mean it's Sony and Microsoft or Apple and Google. It's a much more limited universe, and so that's challenging. I hope that goes away and narrows down soon. But the thing that we're super excited about is actually taking the best of Daydream, which is kind of the portability, the anywhere, and kind of expanding that power into these standalone headsets. You guys are launching one shortly. And being able to bring more and more rendering power into those standalone headsets, inside-out tracking with Tango, that solves a whole host of consumer adoption problems. Like, it's a pain in the butt to put light boxes up there and run through that stuff. So you guys are really pushing into the area that we want to go, which is we think it's mobile, we think it's, has inside-out tracking, has AR pieces to be layered into it, and that's the stuff that we're waiting for and excited about.
Awesome.
I think, like, for us, the biggest thing that we want to continue doing is like character interaction, which you guys love too, right? It's fun. Like it has a lot of, you automatically get a lot of personality out of it. You get a more connected feeling with that world that you're in, and we've done that in like every one of our games so far has been character driven, and it's hard to do. I mean, in terms of costs and stuff like that, I think a lot of things, or a lot of people might shy away from some of that sometimes, or just, I don't know. I mean, obviously there are a million different types of games, and everybody should play all those different kinds. But we like to focus on those character moments and stuff. And like, we're only 3 people, but our first, like, it's me and my business partner, and our first and only hire so far has been a full-time animator.
Totally.
Which I think a lot of people are like, why? But
that's really
makes total sense.
As I tell you. Characters are core to what we do as storytellers, and the simple idea is that if you don't care about the characters, you don't really care about the story.
Right. Yeah.
And if you're developing story-driven games, I think you fundamentally have to start in that same place, is that the characters are critical to that development of that story.
I think I found too, or at least this is the feeling that I get when I play like character-driven stuff, is that having other characters around, very quickly helps ground me in that world and make me feel like I'm a part of that story as well. And
again, you don't have to be human. You don't have to be. It doesn't have to be photorealistic.
Not at all.
And I think for us, the way we like to describe that framework, because when I was in video games, I used to say, video games were just interactive animation, and animation was just a non-interactive video game. And I've since learned that I'm not that smart, and the world's far more complex than that. The way we talk about it at Baobab is we want kind of the empathy of film, the agency of video games, because you have that interactive medium, and the motivations of real life. And that kind of comes together when you get it right in a magical way.
Yeah.
That's kind of our goal of our company.
Absolutely. So we're running a little low on time. Any advice about how, any advice you have for folks who are thinking about starting up on Daydream? Ways to get started, things, good tools of the trade, good tricks?
I think from like the design side of it, at least, like we had just like understanding the capabilities of the controller is super important. I think early on in development of Along Together, we were trying to do a lot of stuff with the gyroscope and the accelerometer, and it had just all these features that we were trying to do a bunch of stuff with. And I'm not saying this is always the case, but for us, like really scaling back and saying, okay, like what is the simplest way for people to interact with this controller and interact with the world? Kind of like you were saying, like earlier, really figuring out the simple interactions that have a big impact, and that we felt like doing too much with the controller in general, even though there are all these things you can do with it, really increased like the learning curve quite a lot. So I think really getting your controls like streamlined if you're doing a game or even just anything with interaction, I think that's like a big place to start for Daydream.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, obviously Unity makes it a much easier prospect to get into mobile devices. Obviously, you should be working in a game engine. I do think that your point around controllers is really well said. There was an interesting stat that that Oculus released last week about Oculus Connect around the pieces that had effective use of the controller, which theirs is a 3DoF controller as well, dramatically increased engagement and length of viewer time. So I'd say definitely wrap in a controller screen, and I'd say finally, don't try to do too much too fast. You know, bite-sized experiments, see how it goes, and learn.
Yeah.
That's probably the fastest way to get something good out there.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you both for being here today. Really looking forward to seeing what you guys do next in terms of your next products, and thank you for giving us like a quick education on VR and VR storytelling.